immediately presenting to you Dr. Matthias Nijt, who is an economist having obtained his PhD in 2006 from the University in Ghent with a dissertation entitled Economic Evaluation of Medical Innovation. And since then, he has been working as senior health economist at the Belgian Healthcare Knowledge Center, KCE, an independent federal agency providing advice to policymakers. He's the founder as well of Meta, Medical Evaluation and Technology Assessment, that conducts systematic reviews and HTAs for foreign nonprofit organizations. And he provides professional training in HTA and economic evaluation. And as I stated 2 weeks back, this info is available on our student portal. And I also have a slide for you. Having followed this training myself, I can only recommend this to all of you who want to know a little bit more about health economic assessment. Matthias and I have also known each other already for 11 years now, and I'm very, very grateful that he too is present every year to share with you the recent developments in the field of health economic evaluation. Matthias, please, the floor is yours. Maybe just to remind the students, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A. And also, if you have questions at the end for Matthias, we will then handle the questions because Matthias will not be able to stay with us until the end. Thank you, Matthias. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilde. I will share my screen with you. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. Just change the position of my screen. I see myself. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for the invitation, and I will give a talk related to the new HTA regulation and the impact on both the pre-period of the pre-registration period and the post-marketing registration study, the impact it can have on the clinical studies. As you mentioned, I work since 2005, so more than 20 years now for the Belgian Healthcare Knowledge Center. And just to mention, I have no conflicts of interest with the activities in Meta. The trainings are open for everybody, but we do not perform tasks for profit. Giving advice at KC independent, it would be a problem, of course, if I would work for profit. Just to make that clear, the tasks we perform is only for the non-profit sector. In my presentation, I will link to reports from the past. They're mentioned here, but I will share everything with you. So afterwards, you will receive the slides. You will receive these reports with a synthesis, with recommendations. So you have everything. For those who have not so many time, I will also share these papers with you. It's more brief. It's linked to these reports. And let's say, one of the topics I want to work on in this presentation is the new HTA regulation. I don't often use the words of major breakthroughs, but let's say of having a major step forward. Well, this HTA regulation is in that category. You will see that the collaboration between HTA institutes at this moment is really at a high level, where in the past it was more on a voluntary basis. Now it's really linked to EU regulation, and that will help us in having good evidence and a good objective evaluation of evidence that we need in national procedures when we want to reimburse drugs or devices. Okay, so is the information that I will provide you afterwards. For the structure of this presentation, before going to the HTA regulation, I will first give some background information on registration versus reimbursements, and also the link to the managed entry agreements with their risks, problems, but also the potential they have. Then in the second part, I will make the link to a situation that we want to avoid for the future. So looking back to the past is really to identify where we are confronted with problems in evidence generation and what we want to avoid. How we can avoid this, I will make then the link to the HTA regulation, explain what are the principles, refer to the so-called joint clinical assessments and the joint scientific consultation, and also making the link to interesting guidance documents. And then at the end, I will link these elements and make the link to setting up studies in the pre-marketing phase and in the post-marketing phase. Okay, so starting with registration and reimbursement and the managed entry agreements. I hope you are aware of the registration, that is at the European level, that there they look at quality, safety, and efficacy. For me, it's important for you to know that that is a benefit risk assessment. Where at the national level, where you look at reimbursements, you have a comparative assessment and you look at extra criteria like cost effectiveness, budget impact. Now, very important here is to know that benefit risk does not necessarily mean that you compare an intervention with another intervention. People are not always aware of that. It's not an obligation to compare with standard of care. Our EMA colleagues also have a preference to compare with standard of care and to include specific endpoints. But let's say they have also to deal with the information that is provided to them. And according to the legislation, it's a benefit risk. So it can be, for example, looking at an intervention and the situation before, after. Before you had the treatment, after you have the treatment. That's not comparing with standard of care necessarily. It's possible that you have a placebo-controlled. It's possible that you have a single-arm trial, not a comparative trial, okay? So being aware of that and knowing that at the national level in HTA, you want to compare with what is the added value of this intervention versus the standard of care or other relevant alternatives on specific endpoints that are relevant for patients. And if we then look at EMA level and HTA level, then we see differences in both comparator and endpoints. So there are people who looked at this in the past. This is just an extra slide. If you say, I want some further information, we'll not provide you all the details, but you will have the slides. This is from Tafuri, who compared what is advised at EMA, what is advised at HTA, and where are the main differences. In this slide, in this figure, the colors are a little bit unlucky because red is partial agreement and green is disagreement. So in fact, you have to combine those two. And then you see here in the red box, it's mainly on the comparator that there are differences and mainly in the endpoints. I come back to that later, but for example, on the endpoints, quality of life is accepted by EMA, but it's not an obligation to measure quality of life. And that's one of the elements that we see that is often missing. Some stakeholders mentioned to us, Matthias, we do include quality of life, perfect, but too often still we see in HTA that the quality of life information is missing. And if you ask this to policymakers, if you ask this also to physicians, but especially also to patients, for patients, it's always at number 1 or 2, the quality of life that they say that is very important for us. Knowing that there's often uncertainty, I come now to the managed entry agreements. So it's in the post-marketing phase. There is a possibility to have managed entry agreements. What does that mean? If there's insufficient evidence, but you are in favor of access, and it's both patients, it's not only the health technology developer, but also the physicians, the patients, and also the policymaker. You want rapid access to the interventions with high potential, high added value. But if you say, I'm not sure, there's insufficient evidence, then since 2010, you have the possibility for a managed entry agreement. If you see this in legal texts, in the past it was Article 81 and 81 bis. Now that is Article 111, 112, and 113. So if you read this, this is the same as these managed entry agreements. Now, if there's insufficient evidence, there's a link to evidence generation, but I put this in red because what we see if we evaluate these managed entry agreements, and that's also what we hear from colleagues in other countries, that it's often a coverage without evidence development and not a coverage with evidence development. So we see that also in the files, if you look then 3-4 years later, if it's resubmitted, that the open questions on added value are still open. So in fact, in reality, those managed entry agreements are not in first instance solving the research problems. It's more the price negotiations. So it's often the confidential price reductions that are included in those managed entry agreements. I come back later after the HTA regulation to how this situation could be improved. Okay, now just as background, I think you already know this, so I will be very brief, but these managed entry agreements are part of the reimbursement procedure. So you have the traditional 180 procedure. First 90 days is the assessment. Then you have a provisional proposal or a final proposal in the appraisal, the 60 days appraisal, and the last 30 days are for the decision of the minister. These managed entry agreements are in parallel here. It's a 120 days procedure. And so it's part, in fact, of the reimbursement procedure in Belgium. Okay. Now, the risks, the problems we have with these managed entry agreements are, there are multiple problems. A first one is that in the past, if you would not have sufficient evidence, it would be a yes or a no, and very probably a no. Now you have this in-between solution of, instead of saying no or a final yes, let's do it with a managed entry agreement. So what we see is that there are more submission files with immature data, a lack of head-to-head comparisons, and also use of surrogates. If you don't know what surrogates are, I come back to that later. But in fact, the final endpoints like survival and quality of life, like I mentioned, quality of life often missing, and then assumptions are made about the link between the surrogate and the final endpoint. So it's often with immature data, not non-final data, and then you would say, well, these managed entry agreements are there to gather this additional data. But what do we see? Belgium has a low negotiation power, and so you cannot force companies to say, you should do this. And when you sign a contract, let's say, what would be an improvement is to include this as a condition within the contract to perform that study and to have consequences if not. Why? If you don't do this, then there are not so many incentives for the company to perform the study. If you perform the study, it costs money, and you might have that result is not positive, that you lose the reimbursement. If you don't perform the study, what we see is that managed entry agreements, that there is a prolongation, that there is a new managed entry agreement with the new uncertainty or the same uncertainty, let's say, that still exists. So the incentive to collect additional data is not present for the company in that case. So you should make it for sure that it's included as a part of the contract and also have an exit strategy if the conditions are not fulfilled. Another thing that we see since 2010 is that there's a snowball effect. First, it was interventions with price reductions, but those interventions become the new comparators. If you then want to have a price negotiation about the new comparator, but you cannot say what the public price you have the public, but what is the price discount of the comparator, what you do is you also put it under a confidential contract. So there's a snowball effect within oncology, especially of the managed entry agreements. And so it creates a very untransparent system on what prices do we pay for these products. This is just an extra slide. More details is in that report, but in fact, this is not our opinion. It's also what we see, what is written by the expert in the new submitted file a number of years later, that they say the uncertainty of added value of X versus Y is still existing. The added value on quality of life of that product, we still don't know what is the impact on quality of life. You see that these uncertainties still exist if you are 3-4 years later and you resubmit a file, because those contracts are for a limited time. It's most of the times for 3 years and then 1 year that you have to resubmit the reimbursement request. Now, that does not mean that we are negative for these managed entry agreements. Initially, they were set up with a very good reasoning of having uncertainty and trying to solve that scientific uncertainty. So what we would recommend in first instance is to restore that link between the uncertainty and the type of managed entry agreement. You have to question, if my uncertainty is on the added value, what type of research design, what type of study do I need to answer that question? Can I set that up? Yes or not, that type of study. Don't try to use real world data, which are perfect to gather the number of patients treated, the average treatment duration, But if you say added value of A versus B and you just have one arm, then you will have problems. And a couple of years later, you will still not have the answer. So have a link between the uncertainty, the type of managed entry agreement, the type of underlying study that you need. Also more international collaboration, both for further research and for price negotiations. For further research, typically if stakeholders say we are too small for Belgium, a good solution would be to have negotiations together with other countries that are confronted with the same problems on answering that uncertainty. So the final goal, there are more elements or more things to say about these managed entry agreements, but very briefly, it's about the combination of having fast access, but fast access to the interventions where we know they have a good added value for the patients. That in first instance, it starts with the clinical part. And then secondly, because you also want to have a system that is durable from a financial point of view, to have information on added value versus extra cost, so the so-called cost effectiveness. Unfortunately, not everything with an added value, it's not possible to reimburse everything. So there's a limitation on your budgets, and to spend them as efficient as possible, you will have to choose for the most cost-effective interventions. And that's the reason why you have to add this extra criteria next to safety efficacy, also the cost effectiveness. Okay, so that's very briefly tackling or mentioning a small problem, a problem on managed entry agreements. So we have uncertainty where we cannot say we are busy in a very good evidence-based way, but we want to provide access, hoping that we will solve this uncertainty, but we see that in most cases, the uncertainty is not solved. And the second thing is, if we look to the past, like I mentioned, just to learn for the future, how we can do better. Well, first, what do we want to avoid? And here I refer to the report on innovative oncology, where we looked at more than 12 indications to almost 15 years of evolution in survival and in expenditures for pharmaceuticals, and to see how we perform. So it's not a one-on-one, it's not an HTA in which we say we do an evaluation of a specific drug in an indication. This is more general, looking back to the past and see how we perform. And then I'm just picking out one of them, ovarian cancer. I will put it a little bit bigger for you. Like on this graph, you have the observed survival probability. And if you would look to the blue and the green line, for example, you see they are exactly on top of each other. So there's no improvement at all in the observed survival probability. If you would look to the other graphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year observed survival probabilities, these are about flat lines. You don't see an improvement. The same for the median survival time. So in fact, here, impact on overall survival, it's only one element. Of course, you have also quality of life and other things that might be important. But here we just look at survival and the expenditures. And the expenditures, if you look, I will put it bigger for you. If you look at the expenditures, also looking at that period before and after 2013, you see a huge increase in the gross expenditures. Also a huge increase in the average treatment cost per patient. And if you then combine this, in this case, we also looked at that product in green in ovarian cancer. In an individual HTA, we also saw there was no improvement in quality of life. If you see that in general, then this is an example where you say you can question whether this is efficient use of resources. If you see this increase in expenditures without any improvement in survival, which is also influenced by other factors. Factors like better surgery, better radiotherapy, but even with all these elements, you don't see an improvement in overall survival. So that makes you, or that should makes you wonder if we are making good decisions about reimbursement of these products. And of course, this is only one example. But if we look to these 12 indications, then what did we see? In half of these indications, we see an improvement, most of the times a slight improvement in survival. In the other half, unfortunately, no clear improvements in survival. But almost always, if you would look at these colored figures more in detail, almost always a large increase in the gross drug expenditures and the mean treatment costs. Just an observation. If you want to know more about the individual dossiers, the individual treatments, then you cannot look at these observational data. You have to look at the evidence at the randomized trials. That's what we did in that report. We looked at about 40 drugs to more than 100 HTA reports of independent HTA institutes, and they come with the observations of use of immature data, specifically lack of head-to-head comparisons, a lot of single-arm studies, lack of quality of life data, a lot of surrogates that are used. And so these are elements that we say we can do better to have a better estimate on the added value of these drugs when we make reimbursement decisions. And that's where I make the link to the potential of this new HTA regulation. If you never heard of this HTA regulation, then I would say I try to guide you through some very important elements. And also to some guidance documents. I will make you or provide you the link where to start, because there's a lot of information available, but I will help you where to start if you say, I never heard of this and I want to know more about it. So I will first say something about this regulation, make the link to the joint clinical assessments and the joint scientific consultations, and give you the link to the guidance documents, and very briefly make a link to three of these guidance documents. Okay, so I hope most of you already heard of it. If not, it's a regulation that is already approved. So it's already into force since 2022. And then the member states, 27 member states, had 3 years' time to prepare. Last year, we still had to say it will start. Now I can say it already started. In January 2025, this regulation applied to cancer drugs and the advanced therapy medicinal products. So this is about the cell, the gene, and the tissue-related therapies. So we started with this. In 2028, all orphan drugs will be added, and in 2030, it will have its full scope. This has to do with the capabilities of the HTA institutes that we have a progressive application. Because this is a lot of work and this asks a lot of collaboration between the institutes. If you say, where is this information? I will not provide or mention it now in detail. You will have the slides, but you will find it in Article 7, where you will see for all medicinal products where there's an application for a marketing authorization, so the European EMA procedure, they will have this joint clinical assessment procedure. Also for the new indications, also for devices, the high risks, the class 2B and 3, and also for in vitro diagnostics, the class D, this procedure will apply. And what is the key principle? Well, it has a major advantage for the health technology developer. Instead of submitting all the data in all the member states, it's a one-time providing the evidence at the European level. At the European level, it's an assessor and a co-assessor. So it's HTA bodies of 2 countries who will be selected and who will perform this joint clinical assessment. What do they do? In the joint clinical assessment, they do not make conclusions or recommendations. They provide an overview of the clinical part of an HTA. So they provide you an overview of the available evidence on relative effects and the degree of the uncertainty around these relative effects. So this is really that comparative. It's very important in that legislation that the word relative, this is not the benefit risk, this is really comparing with. And I come back to that later because it's the member states who determine to compare with what. There's also, so it's an assessor and co-assessor, and the other member states have to validate. And there's an obligation in the national procedure to make use of this joint clinical assessment report. So data cannot be resubmitted a second time. You have to make use of the data that was submitted at the European level, and everything has to be submitted. There's a major advantage for the health technology developer that they do not have to resubmit the information in every member state. Member states, they remain responsible for drawing conclusions on the added value, making recommendations, and also, for example, on the pricing and reimbursement. There is nothing on pricing and reimbursement in the joint clinical assessment. So that's pure the clinical part. The reimbursement is, of course, a responsibility of the member states. Okay. Just the slides here with the link. It's too small. I will say something about it, but at this moment, I checked it yesterday. So the last update is that there are, at this moment, 14 ongoing GCAs. And I'll put it bigger. You have the information on the name of the products, but here you see assessor, co-assessor. So it's a collaboration of all these HTA institutes. ASHA is from France, Poland, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and here you have the sixth one, Austria, with Belgium is making an assessment. And here at the end, the last one is also Belgium is assessor and Sweden is co-assessor. So you see it's a very huge collaboration between all these member states, providing an objective assessment of the added value of products. It's a comparative assessment. Now, it's very easy to give criticism and to say, we have an assessment and the comparator is incorrect or the endpoints are missing. And then you might say, as a developer, if I knew this before, I would have taken it into account. Well, what is very interesting in the legislation is that there's an article that mentions the health technology developer, they may request a joint scientific consultation. That is what we called in the past an early dialogue. You can have an early dialogue with EMA in parallel with, under the HTA regulation, with the HTA institutes. And so this is at the initiative of the developer. They can ask for this. What will you see in the legislation? It recommends in these early dialogues to go for direct comparative clinical studies, so with randomization, whenever possible, appropriate. What was one of the criticisms in the past of people involved both at the EMA and at the HTA? We heard from those stakeholders that often they mentioned, we provide advice, but the advice is confidential and it's the responsibility of the developer if they follow or not. But if they don't follow, people don't know this. What is a solution in this legislation? I think this was a very smart step that they have taken. The advice is still confidential. You know that there was an advice, but you don't know the details. That's also to protect the company from the competitors. But once later on in the procedure that you have to submit all your information to have this joint clinical assessment report, then in the annex of the legislation, it's mentioned that you have to give an explanation if you deviated from the recommended advice. And that already makes it more stringent. If you don't follow it and you don't have good reason, if they say, we would like you to measure quality of life and you don't measure quality of life, we want to like you to compare with product A and you compare with product B, and it was possible to include quality of life, it was possible to compare with A, this might have consequences later on in a reimbursement decision if you say, well, there is uncertainty, but it's because you did not follow the advice while it was possible. If you are in a situation where you say, no, I deviate with a good explanation, then I can imagine as a policymaker, you have a different position where it's completely clear and well defended why, versus a situation where you say, I don't understand why you just did not follow the advice. So I think that was a very good step to include this in the annex of the legislation. Another thing is that you have a coordination group, and under the coordination group, there are 4 groups, one for the joint clinical assessments, both for drugs and devices, one for the joint scientific consultation. There's also horizon scanning, and there's a methods group. And so it's called MPG, for the M stands for the methods and the P for the procedural guidance. And so what is interesting is that everything that is produced by this group is there to support not only the assessors, but also the companies, and especially those who start the studies. That's very important for you. Sometimes people say, oh, but that's later, that's a problem for my colleagues. No, everything starts with setting up good studies. And so to help those people, you have those guidance documents. It's the same with economic evaluations. Some people think that the guidelines for economic evaluations are for the assessors at Risivinami and for those who perform the dossiers, but in fact, it starts with those who set up the studies. If they can already take into account what follows, they can avoid the frustration that they say, well, if I knew this, I would have included that in my study and I would have a better dossier, more acceptable for the assessors also. So it's very important to go to these methods. Now, they are available at the website of the European Commission. I will say something about these three. The next slide that I will show, forget it immediately, but it's just to show to you, this is the structure on our server at KCE, where we just had the structure that these are a lot of documents. And then the question is where to start. I would say don't start with the implementation regulation. Don't start with the non-guidance documents, but start with the guidance documents, like these three. You will see there are more. So these are the names of the guidance documents. I would say start with direct and indirect and validity. If you never read one of these documents, start with outcomes. If you say I want to continue, go to reporting multiplicity issues and subgroups. I think these are the most important ones if you say I want to take this into account if I set up studies myself. So I will just show you. You see here, this is if you go to that link, you will see key documents 42. I don't know if you now see my screen, but if you would follow the link, you will see key documents 42. If you say where to start with these three: validity, outcomes, and direct and indirect. Okay. Now, very briefly on the direct and indirect, you will see that RCTs, meta-analysis, are preferred, direct comparisons. But of course, if you say I want to compare A and B, but at the time that you set up these studies, C was standard of care, then you cannot avoid this problem. The solution there is that anchored indirect comparisons are also very acceptable. Anchored means A was compared with C, B was compared with C. Let's say that B was earlier on the market and became the new standard of care. Then you can compare A with B indirectly through the anchor of the C. Okay, so you can have then the dotted lines. Condition here is the exchangeability. This means, in fact, that these are similar studies, meaning similar populations within an exclusion criteria. From the moment that you go to observational, population-adjusted, single-arm studies, you will see you will have problems with the reliability of the outcomes. And the document also says the conditions, because you have corrections, but the corrections are, it's often unverifiable and unattainable. It's like saying you have to adjust for all known and unknown factors. How can you correct for unknown factors? And even for the known, if the known is not measured, like smoking status, that's not in an administrative database. How can you then correct for smoking status? So you will often have problems with these other study designs. And in a minute, I will make the link to the validity. So if you go to these documents, I provide this as extra, you will see in the conclusions, it's giving priority to RCTs meta-analysis. It's explaining about this anchored indirect and networks, but it's also explaining the problems with matching adjusted, with single arm, with comparative observational studies. Some people had the interpretation, it's included in the guidance documents, so we can use it. Well, if you read it good, it's in fact showing that there's a lot of bias with these studies. And the last sentence here is important. It may well be that this evidence, so from these type of study designs, is insufficient for an estimation of a relative treatment effectiveness in the context of a joint clinical assessment. Be aware of this. If you go to one of these other guidance documents on the validity, this is the reference. It's in fact providing the assessors a way of checking the validity. What is validity? It's referring to three elements. The last one is in fact on the statistical precision. So your confidence interval, statistically significant or not. External is on the PICO. In fact, the PICO match or mismatch is you ask to member states, to policymakers, what is their relevant comparator? What is their relevant outcome that they are interested in? And you look in these studies, is this measured in this way with this comparator and with these endpoints, yes or no? So it's looking to the mismatch of the studies versus what, in fact, the policymakers are interested in. And the internal validity, that's looking at risk of bias related to the randomization process, related to follow-up or loss to follow-up, related to reporting or biased reporting, to different types of bias. And there are instruments for that. And if you go to the single-arm trials, that document says for the uncontrolled trials, you even don't have to do risk of bias because it's so low level of evidence. It does not allow relative effectiveness assessment as mentioned. And since the uncontrolled trials per se are of very limited value for this relative effectiveness assessment, you even don't have to do risk of bias. So just to make you aware, that's at a very low level. Now, maybe you wonder, why are you stressing this? I'm stressing this because we see that there's a lot of enthusiasm about observational data. And that's no problem if it's, like I mentioned, for counting number of patients, having a look at the cost of a treatment, having a look at the duration of a treatment, these kind of things. Do I have a sufficient population size for randomization? Yes or no? But for relative treatment effect, it's problematic. I will send you this paper in brief. It's mentioning also, it's written together with our German colleagues, that there's a problem with these kinds of observational studies for relative treatment effect. In fact, it hinders the effort of the randomized studies because patients included in the non-randomized are not included in the randomized. So you are in a competition for those same patients and you are doing it in a suboptimal way, where it would be better to include them in randomized studies. And we would like to see more efforts to support the randomized studies and to make them more efficient, cheaper. For example, long-term survival. You don't have to include that in your randomized study. You can link the randomized patients with administrative databases. For everybody, it's known whether you are dead or alive. So longer follow-up to check the surrogate, whether there's a good translation to the survival, you can do this by linking to an administrative database. If you say I can identify with the nomenclature a specific hospitalization, rehospitalization for putting a pacemaker, for example, you can do this by linking with the administrative database because there's a clear nomenclature code for that intervention. For quality of life, for example, not. Quality of life is not available in a database, so you have to gather that in your study. And making that mix and optimizing the way of gathering information might make your study much cheaper. If you have questions about that, we have experience at KC where we also set up trials and where we see that it's much cheaper to do it if you link it to the correct databases, but keeping the randomization of the patients. Something also of our German colleagues, they saw that in the cases of orphan drugs, about 60% of the companies do perform RCTs and others within the same indications do not. So they often see that it's a choice of the company whether or not to perform an RCT, while in a lot of cases it is still possible. And that's in fact a situation where we have avoidable uncertainty. It was possible to perform the study in another way. If you are in a discussion on the use of real world data, I don't have time to explain everything, but I would say be aware of the evidence of using real world data and avoid discussions where you just look at one study where there's a very big effect, real world data, perfect. But most of the studies, it's a question whether there's an added value and a question whether it's large enough. And then the real world data is providing misinformation. These studies compare whether what you see in an RCT, if you can replicate it from real-world data with statistical adjustments like propensity score, and you see there's no correlation. If that would be possible, then the dots would be on this dotted line, but you see it's a cloud in both studies. I don't have time to explain it now in this presentation, but if you are involved or if you have questions, ask or contact me, I can provide you more information. But the real world data on a large scale provides misinformation on the added value. It's both on the direction and also on the size of the treatment effect. And then the third guidance document I would like to mention is on these surrogates. There's a lot of controversy on these surrogates because there is not a good link in most cases between the surrogate and the final. So the guidance documents say, please gather the information directly on quality of life, on adverse events, and on the long term where possible. If you use a surrogate in those assessments, the health technology developer is having an obligation to providing the evidence for the link of the surrogate with the final endpoint. For people not knowing what is a surrogate, I have the definition here on this slide. So it's referring to biomarkers, it's referring to progression-free survival, to response rates, and other surrogates. What is more important is that I refer to this overarching evidence. If you look to the most studies, for the link, for example, between progression-free and overall survival, you will have the references here. You will see that there's a generally low correlation between progression-free and overall survival. This was a large-scale study in advanced solid tumors. Prasad was in oncology. Evidence supporting the use of surrogate endpoints is limited, was the conclusion. And also in Diawali, that was for all the surrogates accepted by FDA, and concluding none of the surrogate measures were strongly correlated with overall survival. Be aware of this problem. Same for quality of life. Most of the studies, this was in about 350 phase 3 in oncology. Well, I cannot say most, but in about half it was not measured. And when it was measured, they have seen that there was a weak correlation between the progression-free and the quality of life. Solution here is measure it directly. There's here the link to the UNETA guidelines. They advise to use a combination of both disease-specific and generic utility instruments. That's much better than making use of a surrogate and then making a lot of assumptions where you are then confronted with a critical assessor that says this is not sufficient for me as for having good information. Last thing I want to say about these surrogates, knowing the HTA regulation, it's an obligation for the health technology developer to provide this evidence. So the level of evidence of this association will be included in the joint clinical assessment report or the information that there is no evidence. So the strength of the association, the limitations, and also important, the indication of when the information on the final endpoint, like on final survival, will be available. That's important to say, well, maybe when that information becomes available, I have to do a reassessment. I have to reconsider my decision. And then for the final minutes, I see I have about 2 more minutes. I make the link to what would we like to have. Maybe I need 3 more minutes. It's referring to this report on evidence gaps. So this is just the reference. And this is in fact combining what I've mentioned in the previous slides. At that moment, the situation, and still we see that the phase 2b/3 studies are lacking the correct comparator, are making use of the non-validated surrogates. And we are in a situation where the post-marketing, the managed center agreements do not provide the evidence. So we are in the gray zone of, is this the product with the added value that we want to reimburse? Better is, based on the consultation, to see if you can improve this study. If it's about including quality of life, that does not make your study longer or much more expensive, but you will have the correct information. If it's about an active comparator, if it's about long-term survival, that might make your study longer, but still you will gather the information in one study, which will be quicker versus the situation where you say, I set up first a brief study and then another one with the information. That will take longer and will cost much more. So this joint scientific consultation, hopefully that will have an impact on comparators and endpoints included in studies. What we also see is that, and I will make this more brief, is that you need this information in time. After the marketing authorization, it's 30 days later that you will have this joint clinical assessment report. And that's in fact the period where you can start your reimbursement request. So the input in the national procedure of this joint clinical assessment is very important. Know that it's not data-driven. It's the countries who determine what is the PICO, so patient intervention, comparator and outcomes? What are they interested in? And so they determine this. Then the technology developer develops the dossier, and then there's the assessment by the assessor and co-assessor. So this is demand-driven. Countries can ask, I want you to compare with this standard of care. I want you to give the evidence versus this endpoint. So this is demand-driven and not data-driven. And I hope, and this is, I have 2 more slides. I hope that this gives it an advantage. That first we'll have better studies due to this consultation. And when the joint clinical assessment arrives, that it will be more clear where there are open research questions, and that countries will collaborate to ask for this further research, and that the managed entry agreements will reflect this uncertainty and have the correct study designs to gather this further information. So my time is over. The final thing that I here want to mention is the focus should be more not only on the fast access, but the combination of access to the interventions with added value for the patients, gathered in a good way. And you have 2 moments in time, that's at the registration and at the reimbursement, where you have a good negotiation position. That's in fact the moments where you have to strive for to convince the technology developer to set up the good studies with the correct comparator, endpoints, etc. And also afterwards, in the post-marketing period, to have better collaboration for the managed entry agreements, for the price negotiations. And in the end, it's all about having a better use of the limited resources. I'll stop here. I hope this was a good introduction, and especially also the link to interesting documents. If you have questions about those documents, both guidelines here about the European procedure. I didn't say anything about guidelines for economic evaluations, but also for that, if you have questions, feel free to ask them now or later. You have my contact details and you will receive the information later on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for giving us more insight in all the ongoing developments. And indeed, if there is something to be said about the HTA regulation, it's that it's, I would say, a landmark, and it was highly needed that this was put in place. I didn't see any questions appear. Indeed, as you said, if there would be questions, I will refer them to you, and indeed they also get the slides about if they want to know more about the course you give them.
Yeah.
To get
And
more.
for questions, my email address is on the first slide. You receive the slides, so people can contact me also afterwards by email if they have more questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Matthias, and all the best.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You.
Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
And then we immediately go to Eline Picavet and Jean-Michel Leux from Novartis. Eline is pricing and reimbursement head at Novartis, and she leads strategic initiative to ensure patient access to innovative therapies. Prior to this role, she served as a market access manager in oncology at Novartis, focusing on enabling access to groundbreaking cancer treatments. Eline, she holds a PhD from KU Leuven on market access for orphan drugs, and her doctoral research provided valuable insight into the 4 main components of market access, and those are registration, pricing, reimbursement, and uptake, obviously. Integrating health economic considerations into the development of orphan drugs to optimize their value for money and facilitate market entry. And then Jean-Michel Leux is head of public affairs at Novartis. They have decades long track record in biopharmaceutical research, and he's committed to improving, well, they are all committed to improving the future of healthcare in Belgium. And to this end, Jean-Michel engages in open and constructive collaboration with various partners to jointly develop innovative and sustainable solutions to better serve patients and physicians. He has a background in biomedical sciences, political sciences, and European affairs, and he worked at other pharmaceutical companies before he joined Novartis. Hello, Eline. It's nice to have you back, Anne and Jean-Michel. I hope that you are safely parked.
I'm safely parked. I'm very sorry. I was coming back for a meeting, but there was traffic jam. But it's okay. I'm here and I'm fully operational
Super.
and ready to roll. And we should revise the introduction because it's way too corporate.
Please introduce yourself then. What is your favorite food?
Favorite quote is finding solutions together, and I think that's what I remember also from Matthias, who is very much from one perspective, but I do like the collaborative mindsets, and that's also I think one thing that we're struggling or we want to achieve. So that's really what I also try to do is get into dialogue and to make sure that we find the solutions together because it will be necessary, as you will see now.
Perfect. And that is actually what we try to convince already the students from since the very first module 2 weeks ago. Indeed, that it will take all of us, all stakeholders, to jointly work to more affordable and accessible drugs for or therapies in general for patients. So indeed, thank you for correcting me. And please, I don't know who will start. Elena, I think.
No, I will share the screen and Jean-Michel will start.
Okay.
One second. Not used to Zoom, but okay. You're seeing this, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm at the last
Thank
slide.
you.
Wait, that's a bit stupid. Sorry. Voilà, Jean-Michel.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know, Aline, if you want to introduce quickly yourself because you. Oh yeah, no, you already have. Okay, great. So our point really now is that you had a very good introduction into the let's say the regulator side of all, and we wanted to bring you a bit how it is like in a pharmaceutical company and what we're struggling with on a daily basis. So just as a way of opening, you know that Belgium is an. By the way, I'm head of public affairs in Belgium, so I don't lead the whole public affairs. Otherwise, I will be in a limo right now or something. So it's I'm only doing public affairs in Belgium. And Belgium is still one of the big biopharma valleys in the world. So we have a lot of clinical trials in Belgium. Although Europe is declining, we do see that within Europe, Belgium is steady. We see that we have a lot of number of patent applications really high. We have a lot of employees, and we do also export a lot. And so we have, and it's on the next slide, as you see, we have as Novartis, we participate in that exportation because we have a manufacturing site in Puurs who is responsible for aseptic production. We have a Belgium HQ and of course also EU lobbying office. All around 1,800 employees. It varies a bit, but I think steady 16 is absolutely true. And we have around 85 brands on the market. Which means also we are one of the market leaders. Between 1 and 5, depends on which ranking you look at. But we are, I think, one of the leading companies in Europe. We're number 1, actually. In Belgium, we're leading, and in the world, we're also one of the global pioneers. So if you take on the next slide, we just want to give you a bit of an overview on how it's developed. Because, of course, like Matthias said, we need to bring drugs on the market, and before that we need research, but that takes a lot of time. And I think it's something that people need to really realize is that we are an industry that is driven by revenue and profit because we're not a non-profit organization. But what we do with that profit is we reinvest it in the research and development for roughly 30%, which is one of the highest of all the industries. And we also have the highest risk of all the industries. So on this graph, you see actually that whatever we do before, so it's like 10 years in advance of preclinical and clinical research, we need to recuperate once we get on the market. And you'll see, but stay on this slide, please. You'll see on that slide that it not a lot come to the market. But I wanted to show you with this slide is once we have a drug that passes EMA and has a positive, or FDA and has the positive clinical trials, well, then is a time to first of all recuperate all the time that we invested before, and that starts then. Then start clicking to recuperate that, but also create an extra value that we can use to not only recoup but also then invest in new molecules. And the green should always be higher because it's not a one-on-one, because we have to account for a lot of failures, and these failures are not only limited to just our own research, but also, for example, assets that we buy very quickly. For example, Galapagos in Belgium is now almost diminished. If you know that Gilead paid almost 500 million for that, well, that 500 million is gone and will never come back. That's something that you need to recuperate also in your in the green part of this. So of course, we create, that's on next slide, we create a lot of research and development. Roughly, and that's the FPA, we say that 1 out of 10,000 original molecules eventually comes to FDA approval, regulatory approval. And then if you then know that roughly half of the FDA EMA approval comes to the market, you see that there is a huge pressure on the drugs that come to the market to recuperate for all, like I said, the failure in the past. And you also see the timelines above. It's from 5 years to almost roughly 10 to 12 years before a drug comes on the market, which also means that today we are exploring the drugs that will be used when we will be older, meaning in 2036, if AI doesn't make sure that everything goes quicker. But for the moment, this is it. And I think that's a reality that people need to understand, that we don't do innovation on command or on demand. This comes from natural selection, and it's not always a one-on-one discussion. Next slide. So yeah, here you see the cost of development. Like I said, you see that these are rising. Why is also rising? Because the low-hanging fruit is over. So for example, statins and stuff like that, they are being developed. They are being widely spread. Now, well, you have now, for example, cholesterol-lowering medicines that work really well. But what do you do then, of course, with the people that are persistent, people that have still a higher cholesterol? You need to go in second and third line, which of course means more difficult research, more difficult trials, more niche populations, which all of that makes the R&D costs go higher. You also have, of course, the one-off treatments. You have also the treatments now that are instead of every day, every 6 months or once a year. These are all developments that cost a lot of money, and you see also that these drug R&D costs really are really soaring in the last decades. And then I think now it's MFN time, if I'm not mistaken. No, yeah. So I think Matthias already said very well. We have limited amount of budget in Belgium. You might ask yourself the question, but that's just an open question: should the government always be responsible for that? Isn't there a bit of a semi-private market that can be possible? But that's just an open question, of course, just to trigger your mind. And we, of course, we want fast access. Because we think that our innovation should come as quick as possible to the patient. But you also see in this whole timeline, and you have to be honest, that's our business model. The sooner, of course, we get access, the sooner we recuperate our investments. And that's something, of course, I didn't mention, is that this is really something typical for industry. After 10 to 12 years post-launch, our patent falls. And once the patent falls, well, we have in Belgium, we have price drops. In the US, for example, you lose almost immediately your whole market to generics. It means that your pressure on saving or on making your business case is very high. And so we need to make sure that the faster we have access, the faster it's better for patients, and it's also better, of course, to make sure that we recuperate our investments. And there you see always a bit of a duality. Yeah? So you see, like I said, we want, of course, to have the best evidence possible, right? The HTA organizations really want as broad as possible with extra guidelines. You just heard the example before, which is completely rational, but you also might believe what is good enough, when is it ever good enough? you have the medical societies that really want, of course, a very strict assessment. And also, once you launch a drug, you have to be aware that it's not that from one day to the other you have a full patient population. Often, and that's also the low-hanging fruit, people now are already on certain treatments that go pretty well. So if you say from one day to the other we have a better drug, well, you need to convince doctors, you need to make sure that they also go towards a new drug, and that also takes time and a lot of energy. And then you have, of course, always a dichotomy between, do we go only for the unmet medical need, or do you also want to go for the smaller indications? And that's always the thing that people might think that the industry is always looking for the big indications. At certain point is certainly true, because we also, as I said again, it's a business model. But then also we as Novartis, for example, we have a lot of indications in drugs for very small and niche populations where we do believe really it's important. So I don't think there you can have a one size fits all. So anyways, you have a lot of pressure right now between, of course, the industry, the payers, and you all read the news, we don't have any money. And then, of course, there's a lot of new geopolitical tensions coming up, and that's the new part that's related to MFN. What is MFN? It's a policy called the most favorable nation. It's from the Trump administration that basically says, well, you know what? We want for Americans the same prices as for their medicines as in Europe. What they say is that Europe has been underpaying for innovation since a long time. And this is not something you might hear the word Trump, so you say this is rubbish, but it's actually across the board. It's also a request made by the Democrats a long time ago. It's something that really lives, but for the first time, you have the Trump administration that really had a policy impact on this. And so, what are they saying is that we want the same prices in US as we want in Europe, and if you don't do that, you will have tariffs for importing. Now, you see, of course, on the left side a bit all the different statistics. I take one. And I think this is a very difficult discussions for some, but it's a brutal reality for others, is that when you look at our pharmaceutical spending, it is true that in the US, this is a couple of times higher than in Europe. And if you see also that share of the global market is in the US much higher than in Europe, meaning that for us as a pharmaceutical company, I've explained you the business model. It's super important. The US market is super important, and we will never jeopardize the US markets for the European market, because it's such an important market to drive revenues, to have, again, then ways to invest in research and development. So, of course, we do everything we can to make sure that patients have access in Europe. But Europe is a very complicated place. In the US, you have, once you have FDA approval, you have access, meaning then that everybody can prescribe your drug, and then you have deals with the PBMs and stuff like that. I'm not going to into it. It's certainly not an efficient structure, but you do have their direct access. And you do see there that we make a lot more leverage. And in Europe, once you have EMA approval, you need to go to the whole, like Matthias just said, HTA approval. And roughly, and Eline will come back to that, it takes around 300 days. These are, again, 1 year of the 12 years that you have on your before your end of patent, that you have to recuperate your investment. So first of all, the US is a very important market. It's a very faster market. It's a larger market. And then, of course, if this comes then to say, look, we want to prioritize and want to say that US has the same prices as in Europe, this is a tectonic shift, of course, because then you might wonder what happens. And I'm not saying with this that we should all go to US system. It has its flaws, and we are completely aware of it, but it's something that policymakers don't really understand. And we believe also that there should be a better reward for innovation in Europe, because, and I think that's next slide, you see a bit the impact of MFN. So what is happening now is that a lot of companies are making deals with the US government, as you saw. And in these price deals, what they say is that they will have the same net price between US and EU in the future, which is, I think, very interesting. And these are all graphs from European Commission source. So it's somebody on LinkedIn that posted. I can share you the link, so it's not biased. So what is the impact of MFN on EU? You have significantly higher prices for new medicines because, of course, if the prices are linked to the US prices, well, companies might come in a situation where they will then postpone launch in Europe. That's a third bullet, because they first want to secure the European market, or they will try to have some kind of compensation and perhaps have a lower price in the US, but ask for a higher price in Europe to make sure that Europe also it becomes an attractive market. So you see that the most favorable nation really comes as a tectonic shift, and you see already that some countries already have special deals to raise budget and to raise thresholds, like in the UK. Next slide. And I think it's also not only China, US, it's also China. So let's not always look, because that's also a very easy one. It's for policymakers who think this is only an American problem. You see also that in China they are increasingly better valuing innovation. They're increasingly wanting to have innovation in their backyards, and by then also by default also paying higher prices for medicine and for innovation, and also making sure that the access delays are way shorter. And that's really something which is going on. It's a Nature article which is published just very recently, which has this conclusion that it's really going fast also in China. So we are a bit in a squeeze as Europe, because we don't have the fast access as in the US, and we don't have the high prices as in the US. And in China, we don't have the fast access as in China. They don't pay the US prices as well, but they do have an enormous market of more than 1 billion Chinese, which is also growing in richdom. So you might also see there that the Pharma Valley is at stake, because as a US company, as a even your European company, where do you invest? Of course, will you continue investing all your clinical trials and all your research and development in Europe, knowing that in Europe you will have lower prices and that your market is less attractive? Or will you try to go and respond to the international tension and try to put some of your research and development also in these, let's say, more rewarding pieces of the world, which really try to attract you, and then try to have because they want your innovation in their backyard? It's just a mindset I just wanted to show you. This is something we're busy every day with. I'm just going to very quickly over the next 2 slides, otherwise Eline is going to don't have any time. So we also made a quick analysis. If you look, it's an external consultant, Dolon, that did it. On average, 1 in 5 of the molecules would not be economically viable if it were only to be the European prices. So I think there is, and Frank van den Broeke said the opposite, but it's a debate. There is a problem where if the how Europe values innovation, and also the timelines it does, it's losing attractiveness as a continent, and that's a fact. If you also see that, for example, a lot of the big companies are investing huge amount of money, like we are investing 23 billion in the US in the next 5 to 10 years. You might not like that, but that's a fact. So and if you have only €1 to spend, every euro we invest in the US, we will not invest in Europe. So we need to make sure that we are aligned. Well, I think that's just setting the scene for Eline. Just to show you what's going on today is really even more important in the light of the current geopolitical tensions.
All right, thanks, Jean-Michel. I think you also already explained, so I'll skip this one. It's you already explained to some extent how we see that there are some delays already in the European system or in the European countries on how long patients have to wait to get a new drug reimbursed. And actually, there are very good statistics that are published on this topic by FPA, and it's something they update every year. And this is the publication that is from last year. And they actually take a look at the availability of new medicines. So they take a sample of everything that is approved at the EMA level, and then look at the different European countries to say, or to look at what is actually being reimbursed at the moment. And you can see that, so there were 173 European EMA approvals, and Germany, Italy, Austria, they have a very high proportion of those drugs reimbursed. While we in Belgium are very close to the European average, with close to half of the drugs reimbursed. But if we look at the amount of what is Belgium is spending on healthcare, we should not be around this average bucket, but we should be a lot more towards the left and towards Austria, Germany, the countries that we most compare to. So we're not that happy about our position here close to the European average. At the same time, we also need to take a look at the duration it takes to get a new drug reimbursed. And again, Germany is leading the graph with a very short time to reimbursement. And when we look for Belgium, we can see that we are actually quite slow. So between the EMA approval and the Belgian reimbursement, it takes on average 550 days to get a drug reimbursed. Now, of course, this is a graph with a wide spread, as you can see. Some drugs, like for some innovations, like the immunotherapies, it was a choice of the minister back in the days to have those treatments immediately reimbursed after EMA decision. However, at the same time, you can see that for other drugs, it takes a lot of time, and it's mostly a reimbursement procedure, a negative decision, a resubmission, potentially another negative decision, a repositioning of the reimbursement, and then potentially a positive decision. We do see some evaluation. I think that's the next slide, unfortunately, in the fact that the weight indicator shows that on average for all the European countries, there is an increase in the delay from the EMA reimbursement, from the EMA approval, to the reimbursement. And of course, as an industry, we fear that with these MFN developments, that this time to availability will only increase. Also, the rate of availability is probably not going to improve over the coming years, unfortunately. Then specifically, when we look at Belgium, what can we do to get the drugs on the market earlier? Actually, so you know this, the reimbursement is considered as the fourth hurdle in getting a drug to the market. And we have a Minister of Health that looked at how can we actually improve the situation for our Belgian patients, and he issued a roadmap for the reimbursement in general, and it has different or many different proposals, including one for early access. And so there used to be a system called the ETR, so the early temporary reimbursement, but it was hardly being used. Actually, only 3 companies, including Novartis, had a product reimbursed in this ETR. And the hurdles were mostly the lack of funding in general and the high administrative burden for the physicians. But the system in general consisted of, you need to get an indication, so an indication where you consider that there is an unmet medical need, that's the UMN. You need to get it on a specific list of unmet medical needs. Then you need to open an ETA, so that's the medical need programs or the compassionate use programs, at the level of the FAGG. And then afterwards, you can ask for an ETR, so the early temporary reimbursement, at a commission at the RISIF, where you can find an agreement on the early temporary reimbursement. As I said, it was not a huge success. So we now have, and actually as a scoop, this was on the roadmap. So it was an initiative from the Minister of Health. And actually, the new law on the early and fast procedure was published yesterday in the Belgian Gazette. So, and it's going into force on the 1st of March, so this Sunday. And it's actually a system quite similar to the previous one, but with a different setup, in a sense that you still need to have to have your indication on the unmet medical need part, where you request for early 6 months before the submission to EMA, similar to what you have in the CUP MMP setting, so in the compassionate use setting. And that's the first part. So there's an early part where you have a sort of fixed compensation per patient treated. And then that's the new part. There is also a part where it's considered as fast access. So when the drug received the marketing authorization for EMA and when normally your reimbursement process starts, you have a new fast system. And during that time, you can get, the companies would still get the fixed amount per patient, but would also get a retroactive payment if in the end they manage to get reimbursement for that drug. So this is an important incentive to get companies to apply for this early and fast reimbursement system. And as I said, so there are fees that are now being increased compared to the previous setting in early temporary reimbursement. They're still considering the drug prices quite low, but there's supposed to be an incentive to submit. So there's different, so there's a fee of 25,000 for the early access part, and then different amounts if you consider that your drug is an orphan, chemical, biological, or not. And then afterwards, if there is a positive reimbursement decision, you can get a difference compensated on the realized price afterwards. However, if there is a negative reimbursement decision, and as you know from the statistics that I showed in the weight indicator, the chances are relatively high, the company is required to continue to treat the patients that they currently treat for the ongoing years. And of course, there is no retroactive compensation either. That was one idea on how we can really incentivize or get access to innovations more early. Another one is the managed entry agreements, and I know that Matthias also discussed this earlier. So from our point of view, these are temporary agreements to really manage the scientific uncertainty and the budget uncertainty. Now, from our feeling, if I can say it that way, it is often a budgetary uncertainty at the level of RISIV, and the scientific uncertainties are often used as a sort of excuse to implement these managed entry agreements. And you'll also see that in the financial setup afterwards. So it's a negotiation between the pharmaceutical companies and RISIV to really try to come to an acceptable cost for a new treatment. Of course, the advantage for us is that we can have the reimbursement earlier because we don't need to officially wait until all the uncertainties have been resolved. Of course, it's temporary, so it always needs to be revised after a fixed timeline. So you should really look at it as a contract. It's a written document where everything is described, the price, the duration, what needs to be collected in terms of data. And of course, the most important part, the financial agreement that is concluded. And according to the law, there are 6 types of compensation mechanisms that are possible. The most simple one, of course, is a percentage of refund. So you have what we call the ex-factory price, the price at which we sell to the pharmacies or to the hospitals. And then on those sales, we pay a fixed percentage back towards the authorities to compensate or to have a difference between the ex-factory price and the net price. And then there are other compensation mechanisms that are possible. For example, you can it's not necessarily voluntary, but as a part of the agreement, you can decrease the price of another product on the market. In those cases, we often choose the products that are close to end of life cycle because that's easier to accept or to absorb. And of course, where is it? There are also pay for performance schemes where there really is a link between you treat a patient, you look at the situation 2 years after, if the patient is still alive, the compensation mechanism is different than if the patient is no longer alive or in progression or in another state anywhere. As I said, the convention has multiple advantages for the patient, of course, because it allows to have faster access to innovative medications. And for us as well, because we have uncertainties at the time of the launch, but we are still able to have the product available on the market and to already start gathering the real-world evidence in the market as soon as possible. And then back to Jean-Michel for the European level.
Yes, thanks, Eline. So, as you have seen now, I think it's important to understand that we are actually all payers and companies in the same boat. We all try to have a drug on the market, and we all want to have access to the patients. Now, the first thing, of course, and that's a very European stuff to do, or Belgium stuff to do, is that everybody, of course, always looks at the European level, because every time there is a problem, then it's always easy, of course, to look at it from at the European level, and this is actually also happening now. So pricing reimbursement is a very still a national competence. So you don't have a lot of you don't have any European competences on that, but you do see more and more, especially when it comes to the payer, that they're looking at the European level for bringing solutions also to this affordability and also to this sizability of the market. And that's in the next slide. You see the triangle, which is very important, is what is now making sure that we are an efficient pharmaceutical environment. It's first of all that we have the right IP. It's second that we tackle the affordability, that we have enough room for budget, and third is that the healthcare systems that are able to absorb the innovation, because of course not every healthcare system is capable of absorbing all the new innovations. I'm thinking, for example, about radioligand therapy, RLTs, which require very specific rooms and a waste system. This is something which is not always possible in certain parts of the world. Now, if you look at the affordability, there's I want to bring you two examples of how people look at it. You have the equity-based tier pricing and the Beneluxa. If you now look at the equity-based tier pricing, what is it? It's that at its next slide, I think at the European level, FPA said, well, we do acknowledge that it's not possible if we want to have one single price. It's not possible, of course, for Romania, but I'm giving you some cliche examples. Let me take for example, Malta, which is much smaller, and Germany. It's not possible for them to have the same price. So what FPA is proposing, and FPA is the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry, so we are a member of FPA, is that why don't we look at the capability, the GDP per country, and why don't we try to adjust the price set on a certain tier a country is in, so that we can make sure that we reduce inequalities, and that we make sure that when you look at the whole movement with MFN and stuff like that, that we don't risk losing, of course, access to the smaller markets, but only base ourselves on the big markets. And so what we said is that, and that's with the general pharmaceutical legislation, that's a very important file that's now finished. It was passed last year. What we said is we would commit to file in every country, and we would really try to have a reimbursement in every country based on that. Now, what we see from the countries, the reaction is that they're not very keen on that, because of course the larger member states, they prefer, of course, to have the price of a smaller member state. So you also see, which is of course completely understandable in the current budgetary proposals, and also how can you defend to your constituency that you're paying a higher price than your neighboring country, for example. That's very complicated. But you do see the intrinsic complexity of Europe there, and European pricing and reimbursement, because and you see it very often now on all other files when it comes to industry, or when it comes to defense and whatever. Of course, countries all have the great European ideas, but in the end, they will always also look at their own constituency and their own budgets and look at that. So the other side, what the countries are doing is, for example, the very famous, and that's on the next slide, Benelux agreements. So the Benelux agreements, it's companies, and I think this will be in the future something that will rise again, is that companies click together, and you see the countries above, that come together and say, look, why don't we jointly negotiate for one specific drug? And why don't we also look at the future of the pipeline, at the horizon scanning, and see how we can do it together. Now, also there, I think, yeah, we can have a philosophical discussion on how it looks like, but you also see there that only, I think, for a moment, 2 files passed. So one of Novartis, so we're proud of that, but and one from one other company. But for the rest, it didn't really fly. And you also see why, because it's purely seen as a cost containment measure. So the basic principle always for these kinds of mechanisms, when it comes to Benelux, is to make sure that we reduce the cost and not directly look at, the rewarding innovation, or what is now really, do we really want the drug? So it's a different mindset that countries always have. And also for us as an experience, you might say, look, one negotiation, that's perfect. In the end, what it was like is that we had to negotiate separately with all the different administrations, because all the different administrations still wanted to have their word to say. They were not really aligned. And so for us, it was, instead of less administrative burden, it was way more administrative burden. And there was the overall reaction was, and I don't know if I can say this yes or no, but anyways, is that we will not probably do it anytime soon again in the same format. Let's say it like that. And now you see another idea popping up, which is the joint procurement. Again, I think, more and more you see that it's always looked purely as a way, and I think this is also coming up now in the Critical Medicines Act, which is now also on the way in Europe. It's always seen from a cost containment reduction purpose, and not from a purely access purpose. I'm not saying that we should have a blind check and we should just get every innovation at the price that we want. But if the going in position of every one of these policy initiative is just to reduce price and costs without doing anything also on, the administrative burden, to making sure that we can better collaborate, I think there is where we see a dichotomy. And now you see with the whole geopolitical context, with the rise of China and also the pressure on MFN, you see that these kinds of joint procurement, this mindset, will not help us in Europe. And I think that's our view. I think we should have much more of an open dialogue. I just also on the GCA part, just to give a bit of a nuance. We completely agree on the potential it has, because at GCA you can also say, look, we all do the clinical assessment together. Now, what we already see now in reality is that you will do a GCA, and then every country itself will do, again, its own assessment, which is counterintuitive to the regulation, of course, but that's just the nature still of how European countries see pricing and reimbursement. So instead of having efficiency, we personally are fearing also, again, a duplication, and that don't really harvesting more efficiencies. Now, lastly, on the low and middle income countries, again, if I take the pyramid, I think we as Novartis, we really want to launch everywhere, and also this is of course being under pressure with MFN. So there is a global pressure on international reference pricing, meaning how do we reference a price from one country to the other. But there's still a commitment of Novartis really to make sure that we try to launch in all the countries. We have for all the countries, all the medicines now a strategy to launch to have a global access. And we also really want to make sure that our therapies are available everywhere with clinical trials. So in a differentiated way. The future of this, and there I must be very honest, I don't know how this will evolve. I think the commitment to continue to serve in low middle income countries will continue, but I do think that it will be much more in a way which with confidential rebates and with confidential pricing, because you do see that other parts of the world are getting much more aggressive and are trying to look at what is the price of one country and trying to reference that for the other. So it's to be seen in this whole move of the Trump administration and this whole move towards trying to look at each other. That we continue really to focus on the low and middle income countries. But I do really believe that for Novartis it's a priority. Just to give you an example, we are launching now a drug in malaria, which is the first malaria drug for infants, which is something we're very proud of. It's not being launched, for example, in big markets. It's also not a purely ESG, so we're not giving it for free. We really have reps in the countries that really do promotion. We really have we have medical people. So we're really considering it as a launch, but at the size of the country. So a bit of the equity-based pricing principle that you saw, but then really for especially the African continent. I think, and that is for me the right mindset, is that you have to make sure that the access is not just merely an ESG component where we just give away our drugs, because that's not sustainable, but we try to find a way where the business case can be made in some countries, and that we can make sure that our drugs can still be available in those countries for who need it, in a way which is also sustainable for us, but of course take into account now also the geographical environment. And also, like I said, the healthcare system needs also to be very much capable of absorbing all of that. So as I said, I think, we won't do it alone. So I don't want to be too negative in the speech now, but I think Europe has a lot of great assets that we can use. But I think in the end, we have to make sure that we protect intellectual property, that we continue on a track where we reward innovation, but in dialogue with the payer. That's why I really like the end of the presentation of Matthias, because also there I think we really can make sure that we understand each other and what we need from each other, and also that we make sure that we strengthen the environment in which these drugs are being absorbed, because also that's, I think, is very important, because you can have access, but if it's still on the shelf, then not really necessary. Then it's not really useful. And on the last slide, I think it's just to share that we ranked first on the access to medicines index. Again, that's a bit of an promo, but just to say that this is really something in the back mind of our CEO. It will always be a priority, and I personally really hope that the whole geopolitical tension doesn't affect this ambition. I'm sure it won't, but also not for Novartis, but also for other companies, that we keeping in mind that launching in these countries is also, from a business point, rationally something which makes sense, because that's also where I think that's how it will continue to be sustainable. Voilà, just giving you a bit of a flavor of our daily work and industry. You might not agree with everything, but it was a very transparent and open way to present this to you. And of course, happy to take any feedback or challenge. I would be very interested. If you have time, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Well, actually, it's a break now, but I promised to stop earlier, so I think it's okay. Are there questions from the students? I didn't see.
There is a hand up.
Yes, Julie, please.
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned that Europe is getting less attractive in the biotechnology field, but the European Biotech Act is announced, I think, to kind of counter that and to get Europe more attractive again. Do you think the European Biotech Act will reach its goal?
The European Biotech Act has a lot of good elements. So it has, for example, the SPC waiver. It has a lot of regulatory vereenvoudigingen. So all of that is quite good. I just think that one thing which is still very national is rewarding of innovation, and I think this is something, and also the faster access, and this is something. You can have the best regulatory processes. You can have a lot of good incentive. I think people should look at it as a whole, and I think the Biotech Act on its own really has a lot of good potential, and our companies. When the companies don't say it's rubbish, often it means that it's good. So it's good, so that you can say it like that. So I think, but it really has to go in tandem with making sure that as Europe, we rethink how we reward innovation, have faster access to innovation, and stuff like that. So unfortunately, if only the Biotech Act would come into place like this, I don't think it would solve everything. However, I think if in tandem with a better thinking, better reflection on how we use budget, how we increase access, how we have faster access, I think then it really has a potential to really make a difference. But it's an end, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for your answer.
Are there other questions? Because I don't see the questions popping up. No? Then I would really, really want to thank you, Elina and Jean-Michel, for your indeed very honest and transparent presentation. I liked it. It was, well, you said I didn't want to be too negative. I liked the fact that you indeed countered with the opportunities now presented in the Biotech Act. Indeed, I think we need to step up, and we discussed this morning. As a European Union, we really need to do an extra effort not to further lag behind the US, and definitely also the emerging potential of China. It's now the time. So, and I think indeed, as you rightfully stated, this will take all of us to collaborate and to think jointly how we can make this a win-win, because of course we cannot leave European patients behind. This is unacceptable.
No. And Novartis is still a European company and has a full commitment to Europe. So I think we have the credibility to have this speech even more than American companies, because we're grounded in Europe and we will always be European. So if we say that Europe needs to step up, we really say that in the interest of also of us, because we are a European company.
Taking some notes, and I will put it as very high up on my notes. So, but I want to thank you, and I want to give the students a little bit of break before we go to the final part of.
Thank you, Hilde. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jean-Michel. Bye.
Bye.
And we reconvene in 6 minutes for the next talk. Thank you. Thank you for being back with us. It's been a very intense day, I must say, but thank you, Lynn, for you. I know it's also a very intense day, and I will not be too long about it because I know you have some slides to present your work. But I already introduced you this morning a little bit, but I will formally introduce you. So you are currently the manager of Leuven IRD, KU Leuven's Institute for Rare Diseases, where you lead the Institute's strategic coordination, governance, funding acquisition, and stakeholder engagement to advance rare disease research, clinical care, and policy impact. Previously, you served as a research specialist at Princeton University, where you supervised interdisciplinary teams in innovative research on intracellular organization and phase transition in health and disease. And you also held a postdoctoral position at Columbia University and Harvard Medical School, where your work was focused on neuroimmunology and neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's disease and MS, multiple sclerosis. You obtained your PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from KU Leuven, where your research investigated microglial dysfunction in rare neurometabolic disorders. And we met when we were both, we had some fun when we were research assistants in the lab, where we tried to teach the students how to titrate. So it was a lot of fun with you. So I'm very, very happy that our paths cross again and that you're here to introduce some very, very important, well, a milestone actually, I would say in Belgium, very important and highly needed work. Thank you, Lynn, for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Hilde, for the nice introduction and for having me. It's really a pleasure. It looks like, it doesn't look like it's really a very interesting program that you have generated all together, a very interesting list of speakers. So it's really an honor for me to present here. Thank you very much. I'll share my slides with you. Okay, there we go. Well, actually, so as Hilde nicely introduced, I'm Institute Manager of Leuven Institute for Rare Diseases. We are actually kind of a new institute. I got started just less than a year ago. And of course, as the name says it already, we're focused on rare diseases. And I will tell you a little bit more about rare disease later. But first of all, so the focus of today is rare diseases, the unmet needs of rare diseases, and the need to innovate. And just as a brief introduction, I would like to start with rare diseases and why they're not drivers of biomedical innovation. So first of all, first question, what is innovation? We all talk about innovation, we all know about innovation, but what it officially means is that it's a successful development and application of new knowledge, which can include improvements in production or distribution technologies. And I'm showing you this because I was interested myself. What does it actually mean, innovation? Of course, we like all innovation, but it's important to know what it actually is. But innovation is often measured by impact and not by novelty. And I would like to specify here that innovation is more than technology, because we automatically think about a new technology or a new device, but it's more than a technology. And just to show you what else can it be, I'm having a few examples. So you can see biomedical innovation, which can happen at a molecular level. And a few things where you all know, for example, is the mRNA vaccine, which we have known during COVID. This was an innovative way of producing vaccines, but also a viral vector for gene therapy, for example, or gene editing. That's at a molecular level. Then we can look also at the platform level. And then we think about, for example, organoids. Organoids are these tissue structures based from, they're generated from either stem cells or from human-like cells. And an organoid is a kind of organ-like structure to mimic the organ, to have a better system basically than just a cellular system. Then you can also look at the data level. So data, of course, we think about AI, but also like new novel ways of data sharing, genomics integration into research and things like that. But then also, of course, the translation is important. So clinical translation, what can be innovative is, for example, more patient involvement. Nowadays, they're really focused on involvement of patients in research from the start, so that we actually do accurate research, which is really needed for the patients. Hence also the title Unmet Needs. There's no better person than realizing what they need than the patient itself. So researchers or clinicians, we can think that we know what's needed, but the patient knows better. And by talking more and more to patients, I realized we think we need a therapy, we need to solve. That's not always the issue. It's often a side symptom or something on the side that's bothering them much more than the disease themselves. So that's why it's important. But also, for example, adaptive trials. Why is it necessary? I will talk about later, but with rare diseases, you need to think of adaptive trials. It's not just, we have a large amount of rare disease patient and healthy people. Because of rare disease, there are only few people. Sometimes there is only one person in entire Belgium with a rare disease, so we have to come up with more innovative ways. And then also personalized medicine. And then also at ecosystem level, like forming networks or having impact on policy, to change policy, to create better innovations, for example, like the orphan drug incentive, or forming a public and private alliance to get things done. So those are a few examples. Then my question is, can rare diseases be innovation hotspots? Because it's rare. So to answer this question, I have a question for you first. I can unfortunately not see, you're they're in the audience, right? But Hilde can see, you can raise your hand. So who knows someone with a rare disease?
They cannot raise their hand, but
They
I
cannot
think
raise their hand.
you can answer something in the Q&A. Not sure whether.
I see Julie raising her hand in the chat here.
I too.
Yes,
okay, Hilde
yes.
too.
I have a friend with cystic fibrosis. I think that's a rare disease, right?
That's correct. Yeah, cystic fibrosis is indeed one of the most common rare diseases. So yes, that's correct. And to answer the question, everyone actually knows multiple people with a rare disease. And I like to compare this, like knowing, if you ask the same question, for example, do you know someone with cancer? Everyone knows someone with cancer, unfortunately, but also with a rare disease. There are actually more people living with a rare disease than with cancer. And also knowing that 30% of people with a rare disease don't make the age of 5 years old. So knowing that there are still currently so many people living with a rare disease, it's just to give you an idea how many people there are with a rare disease. And to just give you an idea, this is one of the largest soccer stadiums in the world. It's in Argentina. It's called Mas Monumental. And this can have 84,000 people. So if you take this stadium 6 times, you have about 500,000 people. So know that there are more rare disease patients in only in Belgium than 500,000. The actual numbers are mostly estimated to be around 800,000 people. So that's just really a lot of people. And I'd like to show you this slide because it just says, for me visually, it says much more than a number. But so to give you much more numbers about rare diseases, so a rare disease means that it happens less than 1 in 2,000 patients. Then it's defined as a rare disease. But since there are more than 6,000 known rare diseases, this means that there are many rare diseases or many people with a rare disease in the world. And on average, it takes about 5 years until people get a correct diagnosis, which is incredibly long. It also means that sometimes people have 20 years for a diagnosis or never know their diagnosis. They mostly start in childhood and they mostly have a genetic cause. And 30%, as I said, doesn't make the age of 5, unfortunately. So 1 in 2 receives initially a wrong diagnosis. And then if you finally get a diagnosis, unfortunately, there's only treatment available for less than 6%. And then on top of that, rare diseases are often complex, so there is a lack of support, social isolation. They're complex, they're chronic, and they're often disabling. So yes, rare diseases can be innovation hotspots because we have a lot of rare diseases, so which meaning there are 300 million patients worldwide. There's a lack of treatments, so there's a strong innovation pressure, and they're scientifically complex and biologically diverse, so which also asks for innovation. They're very small patient population because for every rare disease there is a low amount of patients, and they're often high cost per therapy, speaking about millions for one therapy for one patient. And then there's fragmented knowledge because it's often, of course, difficult to have an expert in a rare disease since there may be some diseases you only see one patient in your entire career. You cannot really call yourself an expert. So this creates a huge unmet needs. Rare diseases known have a huge unmet needs. Rare diseases often have these genetic components, so this is ideal for the development of genetic therapies, which is often, or more advanced therapies in general. And then there are regulatory challenges because of these aspects that I've been mentioning here. And that's why there's a need for some policy incentives. So like an Orphan Drug Act, some European incentives, but also, as you maybe have heard, the new Belgian National Plan for Rare Diseases. It has been 13 years since we had a new plan, but now it was announced yesterday by Minister Van den Broeke. All the rare disease stakeholders have been working hard, and we will have a new plan for rare diseases. So rare diseases actually force innovation based on these aspects. And then that's why basically Leuven IRD was also created. Huge unmet needs. But what is Leuven IRD? So the IRD stands for Institute for Rare Diseases. And this is an interdisciplinary institute driving knowledge, awareness, and impact in rare diseases. And our aim is to form the bridge between the different stakeholders involved in rare diseases. So just to give you an example, we work together with UZ Leuven. We are a KU Leuven Institute, but we closely collaborate with UZ Leuven. In UZ Leuven, it's clear how many doctors are involved in rare diseases. On average, there are 30,000 patients with a rare disease seen every year. But rare disease expertise at KU Leuven is unclear. And this is one of the reasons that Leuven IRD was created. Another reason is to create more interaction between the different stakeholders. In the first place, also between the clinics and the research, so that the research developments, the innovative research also can be translated towards the clinic, but also that the needs that are formed within the clinic can go back to research. So this is very important. That's why the Leuven IRD was created, and of course to involve other stakeholders as well. So our mission is to unite KU Leuven and UZ Leuven experts in rare diseases, but not only focused within Leuven area, but just within Belgium and also in a more global perspective. Because for rare diseases, it's important to think cross borders to get things done, of course. So by combining expertise, data, we would like to foster breakthrough research, drive knowledge translation, and promote faster diagnosis, better treatments, and greater public awareness. So our objectives are to first form an active rare disease research community and promote interdisciplinarity. Also promote patient-centered and socially relevant research to enhance the visibility of rare diseases and to position ourselves as a knowledge hub, and to bundle research initiatives and build an ecosystem around for rare diseases. So to show this ecosystem, how it's formed. So as I said, multiple stakeholders, who are they? So you have the researchers, you have clinicians, you have patients and their families, you have policymakers, you have the industrial partners, and then you have the greater society. And it's important to collaborate and also to think on an international level. On the research base, we have a European Rare Disease Research Alliance called ERDIRA, And also on the clinical level, we have the European Reference Network. So we make sure that all their policies, their initiatives are implemented within Belgium, but also vice versa, that our initiatives, that we collaborate with Europe and with more global organizations. And then we have within our institute different working groups, so to focus on specific areas. And the first work group focus on the mapping of the rare disease expertise. Then the second focus on integration of clinical and genetic data. The third is focused on the revealing the unmet needs of the rare disease population. And then in the fourth working group, we focus on the acceleration of diagnosis and therapy development. And of course, there are more working groups probably in the future, but that's where we're focused on right now. And of course, public awareness is very important as well. Just to give you maybe an idea, like what do we do then as an institute? It's on multiple fronts. So we support, of course, funding and grants for the researchers and clinicians. We also make sure that we build a strong network around rare diseases to organize also collaborative events, symposia, webinars and lectures, to share news items and make sure that our scientific information is accessible to the society, and then being a voice for rare diseases. So represent patients and their needs, create public awareness, and being a trusted interface between the different stakeholders. And then to tell you a little bit more about the working groups at Leuven IRD. So the first, I was telling you about mapping the expertise. What does it mean? It's many different people in many different disciplines are focused on rare diseases. It's our goal to, of course, map them all so that they can become visible for internal and external stakeholders. Like, oh, we need an expert in this domain, and we will be finding this with a tool. For this, we will collaborate with the AI, the Leuven AI Institute. They're developing a tool to form a data bank. This data bank will be used initially internally, and of course, if it's set and ready to go, we will launch it to also become a request portal, not just to find the right experts, but also the right tools, the more ethical aspects, social aspects, anything related to rare disease can be should be accessible through this portal or this data bank. And then in the second working group, as I mentioned, we want to integrate clinical and genomic data. Why is it important? Well, all these patients, of course, they have their own clinical and genetic data. It's restricted due to privacy, but it's basically a gold mine of information. And we would like to make it, keep, of course, it private, but make it more accessible for researchers, but also in an international way. If people are looking for new patients with specific rare diseases or with specific symptoms, that we can access it, and to make it compatible to a more global data infrastructure, to also link them to international records, to organize the multidisciplinary discussions for undiagnosed patients with the new tools and new innovations that we have. It's important that to trace these patients, that we can eventually, hopefully, find a diagnosis, and make this data accessible for research, of course, but also establish an ethical and legal framework for this data sharing. And all with the goal of course, acceleration of diagnosing rare diseases, increase the scientific value, strengthen participation, and improve genomic literacy among healthcare providers. And then the third working group is about unmet needs. So this is actually guiding the research and policy by identifying the unmet needs. That's what I mentioned already. We think we know what the unmet needs are, but that's not the case. So how will we do that? It's by forming a large questionnaire. We have a PhD student now who is working on it. It's in the lab of Professor Isabel Huis. And he's making a questionnaire. He's also first adapting it with patients. Patients are also working it to see whether everything is included. Is it also focused on kids with rare diseases, or maybe people who are not able to fill in the questionnaire themselves, but their parents do? And And then we will launch it first internally within UZ Leuven, but then also on a Belgian level within different hospitals and hopefully also globally to have a more global perspective on the unmet needs. So we want to develop a centralized dashboard for these unmet needs, engage patients actively in research and in platform development, and translate then these unmet needs into research priorities and policy priorities to create basically clinically relevant and patient-oriented solutions. And then in the fourth working group, we focus on the acceleration of diagnosis so that it doesn't take on average 5 years anymore, but also more personalized, better equipped therapies. And this is through this collaboration between research, clinicians, and patients. So we have in this working group like different members, and I will tell you later about it too, but all stakeholders are involved basically. So the point is to build a hub for personalized medicine. To do that, we also closely collaborate with LINKS. LINKS is also a new, LINKS is actually focused on ATMPs, so the advanced therapies within UZ Leuven, but also just globally and European level. They work closely together for new genetic therapies. So we would like to reduce these barriers to therapy development and implementations, and there are many, to launch spearhead projects to advance diagnostics, disease models, and therapies, and to make optimal use of hospital exemption. What is this hospital exemption? It's very complicated to give gene therapies because of many ethical reasons, the high costs and things like that. But the hospital exemption, as the word explains, you have a kind of few exemptions, and that means that it's more easier to apply, to use and develop genetic therapies and to use it on the patients. And then also focus on, of course, education. We're still KU Leuven Institute, so we focus on education around ATMPs, around rare diseases. So this is just a bit of a scheme, how it basically works. This working group also in practice is sometimes you have an undiagnosed patient. Of course, within the clinics, you do diagnostic testing, and then you come to a clinical diagnosis or a genetic diagnosis, but there is no treatment. And within Leuven IRD, we work together to do some disease modeling, molecular characterization to understand the cause of the disease, to understand the mechanism of disease, and to basically develop new medicine, precision medicine, can be advanced therapies, biologicals, small molecules. Then we do the validation, that's in cells, in organoids, as I mentioned, or more in animal models, to come to some new disease management. That's the goal, of course. That's how it goes in practice, and that's what we're working on. For Leuven IRD, just to give you an overview, how does it work? So we have basically members within the institute, and they're all researchers. They all have a KU Leuven affiliation or UZ affiliation. Of course, we do collaborate with also people without Leuven, but to become a member of the institute, yeah, for now, you have to be affiliated with University of the Hospital. So we have about 200 members right now, of which 120 faculty members, 50 non-faculty members like PhD, postdocs, students, and 50% have a hospital affiliation. And then we have now about 15 patients in the expert advisory board, and this we just launched this advisory board, so this will also increase in the future. As you can see, the biomedical sciences is mainly represented here as well on the faculty level, but you can see the department research departments are nicely different disciplines involved. So rare disease innovation at Leuven IRD, I've been talking about innovation, but to give you specifically an idea about what it means within our institute. So we have translational acceleration. What does it mean? So for example, the structured integration of research and clinic, this interaction between the two, breaking the diagnostic odyssey. What does it mean? It's a long, let's say, travel to get to the right diagnosis. This is what we would like to reduce. You have this multidisciplinary case discussion. Why is this the case? A rare disease, it's often not only neurological, it's often multi-system. So that's why we need different experts to sit together and to think about it together. What is the disease here? What's the right diagnosis? And then bridging the lab discoveries to therapy pipelines, this translation of research. Then we have a scientific innovation, so pushing advanced diagnostics and therapies. Then we have the genetic and multi-omics expertise and new research programs and forming consortia also on a European level around different rare diseases. We have the technological innovation, so advanced disease modeling, the most of them I mentioned before. We have the AI-based mapping tool, which is working group 1 to map the expertise, and then data integration. Then on social and communication innovation, I haven't tell you much about it. So creating, of course, awareness. Public science communication is key here about rare diseases, then, of course, in our case. And then now we have a scientific new platform, which we actually launched today. So it's completely new, and what we would like to do is to bring the scientific knowledge towards the society and vice versa, to know the unmet needs of society, patients with a rare disease, and bring it back to clinicians and research. And I will tell you more about it later. And to offer accessible scientific researchers like a podcast, blogs, explainers, and things like that. Then participatory innovation, what does it mean? This co-creation. So we have at all levels patients involved from the start, from the launch of the institute to also the launch of new initiatives to involve in working packages. We have patients involved. We have a needs-driven research, so we focus on the needs before we launch new research projects. And then on the organizational innovation, so there is, of course, we're an interdisciplinary institute, so interfaculty structure, but also international collaboration for rare diseases. We work with an active board. We have different working groups with different members focusing on specific topics. We have advisory boards. We have a patient advisory board, but an expert advisory board. And then we have the accelerators. And then, as I mentioned, so today the launch of a new platform, we call it Zicht op Zeldzaam, or in English, Insights into Rare. So this is offering reliable and accessible scientific information, and there's a cross-format content. So podcast, blogs, interview, there's a Q&A, there are expert pieces. For example, there was a new gene therapy a few months ago in the news, that personalized gene therapy that was given to a young boy with a rare disease in Philadelphia. And this raises a lot of questions. So we would like them to write an expertise in an accessible, layman-friendly way so that everyone can understand and publish it on this platform. Also, of course, we would like feedback from patients, but anyone in society. And we hope to fill the communication gap in science or in rare diseases. And this was supported, this project, by the Warmste Week. So this is how it looks like. The platform, it's available in Dutch, but also in English. So you can choose here in the right top corner. And as you can see, the different items available. Then that's basically how you can find it also. You can find it on all podcast channels. So whatever you prefer, how to listen, whether if you want to watch it, you can watch the videos on the platform or on our YouTube channel. But if you want to listen, find it on any podcast channel. And in this podcast, so what we do is we basically always invite a person with a rare disease and a scientific expert, which can be a doctor, a scientist, or a psychologist. and we focus on a topic that remains under the radar. So we work in different episodes. So every 2 weeks there will be a new episode. And the first themes are focused on inclusivity in education. Also on what about you get a diagnosis of a rare disease, what's the impact on the family and on brothers and sisters. We also focus on therapies, like why is it so costly, why is it not, why is it available in the US or in France but not in Belgium. And then last theme is focused on the importance of peers. So for rare diseases, it's not always easy to find people with the same disorders, and we talk about this as well. This is in Dutch. I will just show you. Do you hear this?
I don't hear it.
Do you hear the sound actually?
No, we don't.
Okay, no problem. This is a trailer of the podcast, but I hope these few seconds were enough to guide you through the platform and watch more if you're curious and interested. So these are, I added QR codes for those who are interested to go directly to the platform or to go to Spotify. I showed Spotify here, but it's also available. Just type Onder de Radar, so it's in Dutch for now. The podcasts will also be subtitled in English. I haven't done it yet, but it's soon to come. If you're French or English speaking, then it should also be accessible. As I mentioned, we have a patient advice council. So we actually got initiated this initiative. We have already patients who advised us on the platform, on the institute, but nothing formally set in a council. So we launched this about 2 weeks ago, I think, and we had already a nice interested people, and more to come soon. So I also focused on the multidisciplinarity at KU Leuven. Why is it important? I will tell you a bit more. I give you 4 examples. So one around inclusivity, then about AI and engineering, about data integration and ethics and society. So first of all, interdisciplinarity means, of course, bringing different disciplines together. But on, for example, inclusivity, this is in collaboration with the Department of Architecture, and they're focused on the impact of built environments on people with a rare disease. It's also a large European project, and they have focused on a rare disease, which was stroke in little kids. And the disability often leads to active needs, and their needs were like adaptive built environments. So this is an example of an innovation in rare disease, which is not just technology, but really human-centered. Then in collaboration with engineering, why can it be important in rare diseases? It's, for example, the use of machine learning for earlier, more accurate diagnosis of rare diseases, but also the development of intelligent devices and wearables for monitoring symptoms and improving care. And so this cross-disciplinary work, not just the engineers, data scientists, computational biologists, and etc. Then on data innovation, why is it important? Yes, so we need this data, gather data, make it compatible, advance research in a right way. And this enables basically the discovery of shared mechanisms and biomarkers, therapeutic targets. Why is it important in rare diseases? Because it's a rare disease. So it's important to also find the shared and common goals to reduce the costs, to work together in a more efficient way. And then on ethical, legal, and social dimensions are also important. In which way can it be important for rare disease? For example, focus on equitable access to rare disease care, not only, again, the most common rare diseases and not the ultra rare diseases. Also the responsible use of AI, data privacy, and also the societal impact of genomic information. Why is this important? For example, we do screening on every baby basically born. We often do screening for diagnostic purposes. Then the question is like, sometimes we can see things in your genetic information, right? Like, what about Huntington disease? You can trace it already, but maybe someone doesn't want to know that they will develop Huntington disease when at the age of 40 years old. So these are ethical questions that are also very important to include in an interdisciplinary way or institute. So we have to make sure that these innovations are also ethical, fair, and socially sustainable. Then another topic which is important is public awareness. Why is it important? It's of course create impact for your innovation, but also it starts with awareness. If no one is aware about a rare disease, or people think rare disease doesn't happen to me, doesn't affect my family, then this will not lead to the right focus, the right attention, more funding. Just again, to give you an idea, like because cancer is more known, now they have a cancer plan, and the cancer plan gets 200 times more the money than a rare disease plan. We don't want to be sad about it. We have already a plan, we're happy, but this is just a matter of awareness. That's people feel more related to cancer or think this will happen rather to me than a rare disease. So it starts with awareness. A few examples of what we have done is here in the left corner is the Warmste Week. We have done an action and it's a race for rare. So our chief medical officer of the hospital ran against the rector of the university, and they each got a temporary disability related to rare disease. So either an muscular atrophy disease in a wheelchair, and or retinitis pigmentosa is the name, which you develop a kind of tunnel vision, which is very difficult to see. And they ran, and you could support us by guessing who would be the winner and win prizes, which was a nice success. And we will plan to organize it every year with different people. We organize also kids universities, so that's bringing kids to the university. We organize a workshop around rare diseases. The kids could become a doctor or a researcher and learn how it works. So they had to do the diagnosis of someone in front of them, and of course every patient had a kind of rare disease. Then we had a symposium around rare diseases with all stakeholders in Belgium. Science Day. There's just a few examples. But so ecosystem, I think my final slide. So ecosystem building is important, collaboration, communication, and then translation. And this is what we as Institute Leuven IRD would like to, but that's our aim basically. So with this, I would like to thank everyone involved in the initiation of Leuven IRD, of course, our members, working groups, members, supporters, people contributed in any way to the institute. And then a few more QR codes, just if you're interested, to our website, LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you have any question, it would be a pleasure to answer them.
Are there questions? And I know I don't see people who are already panelists. No. Well, actually, I do have a question. This morning I introduced this new rare disease plan that was announced yesterday, and I'm wondering what the role of IRD will be in this new setup, and particularly with respect to the database mapping. That's the idea is that patients, indeed, as you said, it wouldn't take 5 years on average to find the right person to diagnose them, or the right expertise, I would say, or the combined expertise, as you rightfully explained. with respect to the mapping, because you already do it for Leuven, KU Leuven, UZ Leuven. How do you see, well, your role, the Institute's role there in this national plan?
Yeah, it's actually interesting to be involved in a plan to just see how it works. But it was interesting because this committee of rare diseases, there are all different stakeholders involved. So there were the different function hospital, it's called. It's like the eight main hospital research hospitals in Belgium, but also Radiorig. That's the patient that's how you saw the national organization for patients organization about rare diseases, industrial partners, but then and the policy, of course, members. And Leuven IRD was then especially involved in the research part. So you have different sections, of course, and there are action files that you could submit. So based on what you think was needed, and then some action files are accepted, other ones are not. Of course, also based on the limited budget, we could not do everything. Research, yeah, it's really rather now how it will be launched is like this mapping is mostly focused on the care level. So within the hospitals, it's like who are the experts, clinical experts in rare diseases. We do mostly also on research, but also clinicians. But mapping is done by mainly Sensano will do it normally. Every hospital is responsible to define their experts on which rare diseases, and then there will be a system of like ABC dependent on how specialized you are. You have like the A expert center, B expert center, or C, and people need to be referred to the right experts, and not anymore like you have a rare disease patient in one corner of Belgium who is seen by a doctor in the closest hospital, and another one is on the other side. No, we will really specify the experts across Belgium. So that's on the hospital level. And then how Leuven IRD is involved is we have action files for research to promote research, to have more available researchers for rare diseases, basically. But we're a small partner within the greater plan, and the greater plan is focused on care. But we start from the bottom up, the needs, the social needs, the research that has to be done, and things like that. But the budget is limited.
Yes, but the good thing I would say is already that it is now separated from politics, apparently, or so it was announced that it won't be jeopardized always or held by new elections. So that I think is already something good. But okay, it's to be awaited. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it's to be awaited. Julie Brendongs from Comate Kanker asks me and asks you. Voilà. Yeah, you're there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm the only person asking questions.
No, I'm really, really happy with your interaction. Really, honestly, grateful for it.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could maybe tell us something more about links, and also there is also, I think, an overlap because there are also a lot of rare cancers that are also labeled as rare diseases, I think. But how do you handle the overlap?
Yeah, those are two very interesting questions, actually. So Links is a platform. They were launched or they are announced 2 years ago, but they're officially launched also last year. So they're basically an ATMP hub, so an advanced therapy hub. And it's not only focused on rare diseases, but just rare diseases need more often advanced therapies, but also cancers. The most important, the most known tool is the CAR T cell therapy. That's, for example, also an ATMP. But there are ATMPs on so many levels, and the way how Links operates, it's basically a hub which is based on itself, but interacting with many different partners. So, for example, now they have a collaboration also within the US, but it's called cure cells also, and this is also more like a CAR T-like cells to CAR T cell-like therapy. But another example is we're receiving often questions from patients or parents of patients who tell us like, oh, there is a therapy available in the US or it's in a clinical trial for exactly the disease that my daughter or son has. Can it be made available to us? So then we team up also with links. And that's actually a situation which is right now happening, of course, to help them. It must be heartbreaking to have somewhere a therapy but not have access to it. So we try to set up either a clinical trial here in Belgium, or to make sure that a patient gets somewhere helped in Europe. Sometimes there is another clinical trial, like in Switzerland, for example, and we try to also bring in our patients within Belgium in a clinical trial there. So there are a lot of regulatory aspects that have to be taken into account, and Links is involved in the ATMPs. But one of the Links main members is also involved in our working group 4 around therapy acceleration. She's the co-chair. So we are really working fully together on this front. We organize workshops together.
Because we also noticed that a lot of pharmaceutical companies they are taking a step back in the development or like the marketing of these ATMPs because they don't make enough profit from it. Do you think there is a role in academia to make these ATMPs accessible to patients, or?
Yeah, that's really a wonderful question. It's true. It's unfortunate to see this tendency, right? But I think there is a role for research centers and or the academic centers and the hospitals, because of this hospital exemption, for example, to set up like a clinical trial. And then it's basically, if you give this therapy within a clinical trial context, then the patient receives therapy. Of course, it's still costly, but you have sooner access to these therapies, and it makes sure that you have access to these therapies. So even since there are still clinical trials ongoing in the US, they can decide we make another site in Europe, and we treat patients there. There are patients now treated in the US, and now there will be 2 or 3 patients treated in Europe, and probably the patient that wrote to us as well, but in a clinical site in Switzerland. So we're very happy about that. And then for the rare cancers, that's a great question. Before the institute was launched, apparently it was said like the rare cancers it's basically an overlap. So we are not focused as an institute on the rare cancers because, but we try to collaborate for symposium, for conferences about rare cancers, for example. We support each other institute, but the rare cancers are mostly now under the Cancer Institute. But we try to again create awareness for rare cancers together, to set up workshops together, things like that. But it's really in between the two. It's cancer and it's rare. So
And is there still time, or are you now actively trying to get a hospital exemption for some molecules? And do you think it will be successful? Because until now, the hospital exemption hasn't really been successful in Belgium, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's not easy. We're actually organizing a workshop around hospital exemption at the end of April. So in Barcelona, they have been using it successfully, the hospital exemption. So we're having him as an expert. Julio Delgado is his name. We are having him over, and we will organize a lecture and then a debate to also see like who used it already within the hospital. Within Links, for example, we have now someone who is basically responsible for the practical setup of the hub within the hospital itself. He has been using hospital exemption within the Netherlands. So we try to, by creating this workshop, to implement it in a more efficient way into our research institute and yeah.
Very interesting. We're also working on this as well, but because so maybe we can get in touch.
Yeah, that would be great. But
Perfect.
yeah, just reach out to me through my email, limpinbekkers@kleuven.be.
Okay. Okay, I will do that. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions from people? Linda, if you allow me to share slides, I will quickly finish today. There is one question I have, but I won't, but it's also an idea. Well, maybe yes, I can ask because it will come back later. Do you also work on drug repurposing specifically for?
Yeah, we also work on drug repurposing indeed. Me personally, I've done it during one of my postdoc careers as well, but we're also working within different labs are focused on drug repurposing because since that's a way to get therapies faster on the market. It just
I will definitely reach out to you with respect to a friend I have who has
perfect
with a rare disease. Then I will indeed quickly share my screen. I hope this works. Do you see it?
Yeah.
So for those who stayed online, thank you for being there until, well, I would say the very end. You're an hour earlier than your previous cohort. So I think on a Friday, that's already quite a small gift. I asked you to name or to give your biggest health challenge, and I gave some because of course they are not all listed there. I gave some IDs. I didn't get from none of the three people who said I had another health challenge in mind. I didn't get an answer, so this I can only guess. But most of you said that they were most concerned about the sustainability of our health system. And then, of course, the third was the rising cost of therapies, which for me, it goes under the sustainability of our health system. Well, I think a lot of them go under the sustainability. If you want my preference, I think prevention of disease is something that is really a challenge. We always say, and now we also talked about this national rare disease plan, which is on care. I really, really think that we can do so much more on prevention. So this is, I would say, I am one of those three people. And you will see that throughout the course, it might be that once in a while I will ask you to answer the same question, that it might change for some of you. What I intend to do in this last minutes is to just give you an idea of what I'm doing while listening to the courses like you are. I'm trying to make some or to gather some concluding thoughts, things that are for you interesting to later on, instead of reviewing all the recordings, is to quickly grasp, okay, this person said that, or trying for me to make links between talks. So I can guide you maybe very quickly. You see here, sometimes it goes also very quickly for me. So then I just take here and there a screenshot. Of course, you have the slides, but this was just, for example, to show you the complexity of the legal framework that was presented this morning with respect to clinical trials. And honestly, I'm again very happy that in all of the presentations that we got so far, collaboration. It always comes back. I lean for you. I also took a screenshot of the collaborative network that you presented, because this is really where I think the focus is interdisciplinary collaboration, and you rightfully presented it as well, that this is highly needed. So this I will of course, not read all of this because this was presented to you today. These are some takeaways, I would say. You can, I will put them as fast as possible on our UV platform, the current legal framework, and then some possible changes to the regulatory data plan. Some closing remarks with respect to the Novartis presentation. Here and there, I think of a slide that I saw in the past, and then I added just a visual. Here, it was with respect to the collaborative network. And then I would highlight that on Monday at 12:30, we have a reading seminar, and you saw him 2 weeks ago, Nicholas Blomberg, but he will present again other things. So feel free to either join on site or online on Monday. I also promised that I will highlight the course on economic evaluation and health technology assessment by Matthias Neet. So here is the information. Everything you have from information will also be put on our site. Then I think Lynn referred to the unmet needs work of Silke Klaassen, which will now be presented and indeed leads to, well, more research, PhD research. She will present in 2 weeks on Friday, right after our course. I'm thinking about, well, we will be in Brussels all together. I'm thinking to afterwards join her because I think this is a very, very interesting topic to present, not only as a research, as a PhD thesis, but definitely it's highly needed, going from defining what the unmet needs indicators are, including it. And this is what I am very curious also about the work of Lynn with respect to engaging patients through podcasts, through, well, in awareness campaigns. Indeed, they are the expert. Then there's a rare disease innovation on demand panel discussion that I got aware of or received the information from yesterday. This will all be available in the slides. Voila, and I want to thank you, and I even gave you back even more time, unless, and I will stop sharing, unless anybody has a question, don't hesitate to reach out, and otherwise I would like to thank you very much for your stay, for your presence here today with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilde. Thank you, everyone.